What if the most terrifying encounter of your life wasn't with something from our world, but from the space between realities? That low hum you dismiss as power lines, those lights you explain away as drones. What if there's something else entirely? Something that's been watching, waiting, and communicating in a language that shatters human minds. I'm not talking about little green men from distant stars. I'm talking about entities that exist in the folds of our own reality, whose very presence bends physics and rewrites consciousness. For 12 years, I patrolled a high desert in Nevada, thinking I understood the boundaries of the possible. Then one winter night, responding to a routine welfare check, I stumbled into a secret the government has guarded for 60 years. This isn't a story about UFOs. It's about what happens when you peel back the surface of reality and discover something looking back. What I found in that abandoned facility wasn't alien. It was profoundly, terrifyingly other, and it changed what it means to be human. The land doesn't just hold secrets in eastern Nevada. It breathes them. My patrol sector was a sprawling tapestry of dust and sagebrush, where a single road could stretch the horizon without a bend. The county sheriff department was perpetually understaffed, 5 of us covering an area larger than some states. You learn to read the silence out here. The different qualities of quiet, the peaceful hush of a canyon at dusk, and the predatory stillness that precedes a storm. Walter Boone was a fixture in that landscape, a retired geologist who traded academia for solitude in his family's old ranch cabin. He was a man of measured words and deep observation, not given to flights of fancy. When my dispatch radio crackled a welfare request of coordinates on that November night, the concern was procedural, not urgent, just a check-in. I found him on his porch under a vault of stars, a hunting rifle leaning against his chair. The light from his open door carved his face into sharp planes of shadow. It wasn't the rifle that unsettled me. Most folks out here kept one close. It was his eyes, a look of raw, fundamental unease I'd seen only a few times before. In the face, a hiker who'd been lost for 3 days, and a woman who just witnessed something no person should see. "Deputy Vance," he said, his voice gravelly. "No greeting. Appreciate you coming. It's up on the mesa." The sounds came back. I took a seat on the porch step, letting the night settle around us. "What sounds, Walt?" He was silent for a full minute, listening to the wind in the pinyon pines. "You know the old Tango Station? The research outpost they shut down back in the 90s? I nodded. Everyone knew Sector Tango, a relic of Cold War paranoia perched on a remote mesa, officially decommissioned and forgotten. "It has a sound," he continued, his gaze fixed on the dark silhouette of the mesa against the starry sky. "A specific, deep-frequency vibration when its primary array was powered up. It's not a noise you hear with your ears, Eli. You feel it in your teeth. In your bones. It gets into bedrock. They powered it down for good in 95, and the silence that followed was the relief. That sound was gone for nearly 30 years. He finally looked at me. 4 nights ago, it started again. Starts around 1 in the morning. Runs until the sky begins to lighten. A constant, rhythmic drone. The geography made his claim improbable. His cabin was 7 miles on the mesa, as the crow flies, with 2 low ridges and a shallow valley between. For a sound to carry that distance through terrain and remain that distinct, it would have to be immense. "You're sure it's not the new wind farm over near the valley?" Sound does funny things at night. A flicker of frustration crossed his face. "I'm a geologist. Son, I've spent my life listening to the earth. I know the sound of machinery, of turbines, of groundwater shifting. This is a Tango array. I'd bet my life on it. Have you called it in? The BLM manages that land." "Called him yesterday," he said, his tone turning sour. The gentleman on the phone was very polite and entirely dismissive. Said the site has been without power for decades, that it's just a shell. Suggested it was likely atmosphere phenomena, or, yes, the wind farm. He promised to note my concerns. Boone spat the bureaucratic phrase into the dirt. They think I'm a lonely old man hearing things. But Walter Boone wasn't a lonely old man. He was one of the most grounded, empirically minded people I knew. If he said the mesa was humming, it was humming. "All right, Walt, I'll drive up there tomorrow, take a look, see if there are any signs of trespass, maybe kids or scrappers messing around. "It's not kids," he said quietly with absolute certainty. "The pattern is too consistent, too mechanical." The drive back to the county road felt longer than usual. The explanation was likely mundane. Illegal campers, a generator, some forgotten piece of equipment on a timer. But Boone's certainty was a seed, and in the fertile silence of the desert night, it began to sprout questions. Why would a decommissioned facility suddenly draw power? And from where? The next afternoon, I pointed my cruiser up the access road to Sector Tango. The 15-mile ribbon of cracked asphalt was a testament to neglect. What had once been a smooth paved road for government vehicles was now a serpentine trail of potholes and frost heaves, lined with the skeletal remains of juniper bushes. The BLM gate at the highway turnoff hung open, its chains severed long ago. The climb was slow, the cruiser suspension groaning in protest as we ascended through ecological zones, from Sagebrush Valley to Pinyon Juniper Woodland, and finally into sparse ponderosa pine as we breached 7,500 feet. The facility emerged from the tree line like a mirage. A central radar dish, a giant white dome now stained with rust and bird droppings, sat on a massive concrete pedestal. Flanking it were two low, windowless buildings made of reinforced concrete, their surfaces pockmarked by decades of hail and sandblasting winds. A third, longer structure that had likely been barracks or offices stood, with its roof partially collapsed. The air was thin and cold, carrying the clean, sharp scent of pine and high desert. Everything spoke of abandonment. No tire tracks in the gravel beyond the old parking area. No broken fences recently crossed. No fresh graffiti. Just the profound, empty silence of a place that had been left to the elements. I killed the engine. The silence was absolute, the kind of deep quiet that highlights the tinnitus in your ears and the beat of your own heart. I stepped out, the crunch of my boots on gravel absurdly loud. I did a slow perimeter check, finding nothing but dirt, old glass, and an occasional animal track. The main door to the radar dome service building was, as Boone had described from his younger explorations, secured by a heavy padlock. It was rusted shut. I was about to radio in a null report when I decided to check the smaller utility building. Its metal door was slightly ajar. I nudged it open with my boot, flashlight beams slicing the interior darkness. And that's when I heard it, not the low hum Boone described. This was different. A fast, metallic click-tick-tick-click, rhythmic and precise, like a high-speed telegraph or the cooling of some enormous engine. It was faint, but clear, and it seemed to be coming from underneath me. I stood frozen in the doorway. The sound was unmistakably mechanical. It shouldn't have existed in a dead facility. My hand went to my sidearm, not out of fear of an ambush, but from a deep, instinctual alarm. The sound was wrong. It was a heartbeat in a corpse. The click-tick-tick-click was a lure. It pulled me across the threshold of the utility building into a space that felt less like a room and more like an airlock between realities. The beam of my flashlight cut through dust, so thick it moved like liquid. The room was empty save for discarded conduit and a few rusted tool lockers bolted to the wall. But the sound was clearer here, and it was definitely coming from below. In the far corner, almost hidden behind a collapsed shelving unit, was a metal hatch set into the concrete floor. It was heavy, industrial, with a recessed lever handle. It was also clean, not polished, but free of the thick dust that coated everything else. The edges showed subtle scuff marks. This was not on any schematic I'd ever seen for this facility. Auxiliary basements weren't uncommon in Cold War installations, but they were usually mapped even in declassified documents. This hatch felt secret, deliberate. My training warred with my curiosity. Procedure said to call for backup, to treat this as a potential hazardous material situation or an unauthorized entry. But my gut, that low-frequency hum of instinct, told me that once I involved a radio, whatever truth lay below would be buried forever by bureaucracy. Boone's frustrated face flashed in my mind. He deserved more than another polite dismissal. I holstered my flashlight, gripped the cold metal lever, and pulled. It moved with a well-oiled, pressurized hiss, not the shriek of rusted metal. The hatch lifted smoothly, revealing a steep stairwell of metal grating descending into absolute blackness. A wave of cooler, sterile-smelling air washed over me. The clicking was louder now, a persistent, digital chatter. I descended. Each step echoed in the narrow shaft. The air grew colder, drier. After what felt like 30 feet, the stairs ended in a stark, concrete corridor. It was lit, not by visible fixtures, but by a faint, sourceless, bluish glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, revealing a passage that stretched into darkness in both directions. The walls were seamless, poured concrete, utterly featureless. This was not 1960s construction. This was newer, far newer. The clicking was a beacon. I followed it to the right, my boots now silent on the smooth floor. The corridor turned once, then ended at a heavy, vault-like door, also featureless except for a small, dark glass panel at eye level. As I approached, the panel lit up with a soft green light, and the door slid sideways into the wall with a whisper. The room beyond stopped me dead. It was a control room from a science fiction film. The space was vast, easily the size of a basketball court. The wall opposite me was a single, curved screen, currently dark. Arrayed before were 3 tiers of workstations, each with multiple monitors, their displays alive with flowing streams of data, undulating waveforms, and rotating 3D models of what looked like energy fields. The air hummed with the sound of active climate control and the subliminal vibration of powerful processors. The click-tick sound was here too, emanating from a bank of black servers along the side wall, their status LEDs blinking in frantic patterns. The room was occupied. 2 figures sat at the central workstation, their backs to me. They wore dark, non-military uniforms, simple polo shirts and trousers. They hadn't heard me enter over the ambient hum. I saw the glow of their screens reflected in the dark main display. One showed a topographic map of the region with several pulsating points of light. The other displayed columns of alphanumeric code scrolling too fast to read. This was the heart of Walter Boone's mystery. A fully operational, state-of-the-art monitoring center buried beneath a publicly abandoned facility. My mind raced through the implications. Black budget. Unacknowledged special access program. The words from my training echoed. Above your pay grade, deputy. Walk away. But I was a county sheriff's deputy on a welfare check, and I was looking at a massive, clandestine installation on county-touching federal land. I cleared my throat. Both figures spun in their chairs. A man and a woman mid-40s, with a clean-cut, alert bearing of government personnel, but without the rigidity of military. Surprise flashed across their faces, followed by a swift, professional composure. "Can we help you?" the man asked, his voice calm, but with an edge. "Sheriff's office." I said, keeping my voice level, my hand resting near but not on my sidearm. "Conducting a check on reports of unauthorized activity at this facility." "You want to tell me what this is?" The man and woman exchanged a glance. It was a look that conveyed volumes. Protocol Alpha. Civilian breach. Contain. The man stood. "I'm Dr. Aristhorn. This is Dr. Lena Shaw. You've stumbled into a secured federal research station, deputy." "Vance. Eli Vance. This station is listed as decommissioned. There's no record of active research. The public record is necessarily incomplete," Dr. Shaw said, rising to stand beside Thorne. Her tone was cool, analytical. "This is a long-term atmospheric and geophysical study under the Department of Energy's Advanced Concepts Office. It's classified. You shouldn't be here." A local resident reported intrusive auditory phenomena emanating from this location. I pressed. "He's being kept awake by it. That makes it a county matter. What atmospheric study creates a low-frequency drone that carries for 7 miles? Thorne's eyes narrowed slightly. "Walter Boone. The geologist." It wasn't a question. They knew about him. They'd been aware of his complaints. The realization was a cold trickle down my spine. They were listening, and they had chosen to do nothing. "The phenomena he's reporting are a documented, if uncommon, side effect of our deep Earth seismic sensors," Thorne continued, reciting what sounded like prepared line. "Harmless. We'll adjust the calibration to mitigate the terrestrial transmission. You can assure Mr. Boone the issue will be resolved." It was a smooth, plausible lie. But it didn't explain the scale of this hidden room, the obvious power draw, or the anxious energy in the blinking server lights. It didn't explain why they were buried here, in the dark. Another glance between them. Shaw gave a barely perceptible nod. Thorne reached slowly into his pocket and produced a credentials wallet. He flipped it open. The ID was impressive, laden with seals, though a Pentagon insignia, others I didn't recognize. It looked real. The name, photo, and clearance lines were all there. The clearance code was a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing to me, but its formatting screamed need to know. "I'd like to see your authorization," I said. "The paperwork that supersedes the county
This facility
land
and
use
our work
registry
here
and the BLM
are protected
decommissioning
under
order
presidential
directive and the National Security Act," Thorne said, his voice taking on a firmer tone. "Your presence constitutes a security breach. Standard protocol requires you to be debriefed and sign non-disclosure agreements. We can do that here, or through more formal channels. I strongly suggest we do it here, for everyone's convenience." It was a soft threat wrapped in procedure. Sign their papers, forget what I'd seen, and walk away. The alternative was implied. A world of federal headaches, of being pulled into a security labyrinth that could end my career. But as I looked past them, at the main screen that suddenly flickered to life, my decision crumbled. The screen now displayed a real-time feed. It was a graph, but unlike any I'd ever seen. It plotted frequency against something labeled dimensional attenuation. And arcing across the graph was a pulse, a brilliant, sustained waveform that was climbing steadily off the chart. At the top of the screen, a timestamp blinked, asterisk active event. In progress. Signature strength. Increasing. Proximity. Imminent. Asterisk. Dr. Shaw followed my gaze. Her professional calm fractured for a microsecond, revealing a flash of sheer, unvarnished alarm. Thorne saw it too. His posture changed. The officious bureaucrat vanished. "Deputy Vance," he said, his voice low and urgent. All pretense dropped. "You need to leave. Right now. Get in your vehicle. Drive down the mountain and do not stop. Do not look at the sky." Imminent is a word that hangs in the air, a blade waiting to drop. Thorne's shift from controlled bureaucrat to urgent warning siren short-circuited my procedural thinking. The sheer, raw alarm on Dr. Shaw's face was more convincing than any badge. "What is that?" I asked, nodding at the pulsing waveform on the main screen, now throbbing with a rhythmic, almost organic intensity. The click-tick sound in the servers had risen in pitch, becoming a frantic, digital chitter. "There's no time," Thorne snapped. He was already moving, grabbing a heavy jacket from the back of his chair. "Lena, initiate full containment protocol. Shunt all non-essential data to the blind archive." He turned back to me, his eyes locking onto mine. "Deputy, this is not a trespassing issue anymore. You are in a hot zone during an active, uncontained manifestation. Your vehicle. Now." Manifestation. The word landed with physical weight. It wasn't signal or phenomenon. It was manifestation. Something taking form. Shaw was already at her console, fingers flying across the keyboard. The overhead lights in the vast room dimmed, replaced by a deep crimson emergency glow. A soft, automated voice echoed through hidden speakers. "Containment protocol theta active. All personnel to designated stations. Non-essential systems powering down." The door I'd entered hissed shut. A magnetic lock thudded into place with a sound of finality. We were sealed in. "You just locked us in," I said, my hand instinctively going to my sidearm. "We're locking it out," Thorne replied, his voice tight. He pointed to a monitor that had switched to a live external feed. It showed the mesa top outside, bathed in the silvery light of a three-quarter moon. The view was from a camera atop the radar dome. The sky was clear, speckled with stars. For a moment, nothing. Then a distortion. It began as a shimmer in the air above the center of the mesa, like heat rising off asphalt, but coiling in on itself in impossible geometric patterns. The stars behind it wavered, stretched, and then snapped back into place as the shimmer condensed. A light appeared, not a solid object, but a locus of light, a point of fierce, silver-white brilliance that hurt to look at even on the screen. It hung in the air, motionless. Primary focal point stabilized, Shaw reported, her voice clinical but strained. Energy signature matches event profile 7. 7? Thorne breathed the word like a curse. He tapped another screen, bringing up a file. I caught a glimpse of header, Asterisk event profile 07. The invitation, Asterisk classified headers, casualty reports that on the feed. The light began to move. It didn't fly. It translated. It vanished from one point and reappeared 10 yards away without traversing the space between. Then again, and again. It was mapping the area in discrete, instantaneous jumps. With each reappearance, a faint, after-image echo of its previous position lingered for a split second, creating a faint, ghostly lattice in the air. Then the sound reached us, not through the microphones, but through the mountain itself. A deep, subharmonic thrum that vibrated up through the floor into the soles of my boots, up my spine, settling into my molars. It was the sound Walter Boone had described, but magnified 100-fold, given physical texture. It was a sound of reality being stressed. Resonance frequency is coupling with the local geology, Shaw said. It's using the mesa as a speaker. On another monitor, a topographic map of the region lit up. From the focal point on the mesa, concentric rings of energy, modeled in rippling red, spread out across the digital landscape like waves in a pond. One of those rings pulsed directly over the location of Boone's cabin. "Oh, God," I whispered. "Boone." "He's inside, he's sheltered," Thorne said, but he didn't sound convinced. He was watching the main focal point. The jumping light had stopped. It now hung steady, directly above the concrete bunker we were buried under. It began to descend. "It's probing the facility," Shaw said. "It knows we're here. It always knows." The light touched the ground on the monitor, just outside. The camera feed from the dome didn't show the ground-level detail. But a new feed activated, a grainy black and white image from a door security camera. It showed the exterior of the utility building door, the one I'd left slightly ajar. The light was there, not as a point, but as a shape. It was a sphere of pure, featureless luminance, about the size of a large beach ball, hovering a foot off the ground. It gave off no beams, cast no shadows. It simply was a hole in the night filled with impossible light. It moved toward the door. "It's going to enter the upper level," I said. "It can't," Thorne replied. "The hatch is sealed. This bunker is lined with proprietary composite. It dampens the resonance signature. We're shadowed down here." The sphere on the feed reached the ajar door. It didn't open it. It passed through the solid metal. There was no dissolution, no melting. One moment it was outside. The next, its glow was visible from within the dark utility room. My heart hammered against my ribs. It had moved through matter like it was air. It hovered in the center of the empty room for a moment. Then it descended. It sank straight through the concrete floor, vanishing from the security feed. A second later, the camera in our own corridor, just outside the vault door, flickered on. The sphere was in the hallway. It floated toward the sealed door to the control room. The crimson emergency light glinted off its perfect, seamless surface. It stopped before the dark glass panel of the door scanner. I in the control room. The hum was deafening. The air felt thick, charged, like before a lightning strike. My skin prickled with static. The sphere on the monitor didn't attempt to bypass the door. It just hung there, silent, pulsating softly. "What does it want?" My voice sounded small. "Communication," the humming room, Thorne said, his eyes glued to the sphere. "That's the theory. It's not a ship. It's a handshake, an attempt to bridge its perceptual framework with ours. But our frameworks are incompatible. Our consciousness is linear, singular. Theirs is not. The handshake breaks the receiver. On the monitor, the sphere did something new. Its surface rippled. The uniform light fractured into patterns, complex, interlacing lines and curves that shifted and flowed. It was beautiful and utterly alien. It felt like watching a language being spoken in pure geometry. A wave of dizziness washed over me. A pressure built behind my eyes. The geometric patterns on the screen seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. For a fleeting second, they arranged themselves into a shape I felt I could almost understand, a concept of connection, of network, of a vast silent chorus. Then a sharp, electronic screech from Shaw's console. Resonance feedback. It's attempting to interface with the main system through the door panel. The vault door shuddered. The sphere outside was emitting a new frequency, a piercing whine that cut through the subharmonic thrum. The lights in our control room flickered violently. The main screen scrambled into static, then resolved into a terrifying image. It was a feed from a body camera, jostling, running. It was Boone's cabin porch. The timestamp was live. The image was from Boone's own security system, hijacked. We saw his front yard, and we saw them, dozens of smaller, softer lights, like will-o'-the-wisps, dancing and weaving to the pines around his property. And in the sky above his roof, another focal point, identical to the first, was beginning to condense. The sphere at our door had divided its attention, or was part of a hive, and it was showing us its next move. Thorne slammed his fist on the console. It's not just probing us. It's escalating. It's making contact on multiple fronts. He turned to me, his face pale in the crimson light. "Deputy, you want to know what we monitor? You're seeing it. This is a first contact scenario that repeats every few years. And it always ends the same way, with broken minds and buried reports. And now it's at your friend's door." The stolen feed from Boone's cabin was a punch to the gut. The smaller, dancing lights, observers, Thorne called them in a clipped tone, were swarming the tree line. The larger focal point above his roof pulsed like a malevolent star. This wasn't an abstract phenomenon on a monitor anymore. It was a targeted incursion on a man's home. "We have to get him out," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could process the impossibility. "You can't," Dr. Shaw said, not looking away from her console. Her fingers were a blur. "The resonance field between here and his location is now at stage 3 saturation. Any living thing crossing that boundary would experience immediate neurological overload. It would be like stepping into a psychic cyclone. So we just watch." I shot back, my voice rising over the escalating hum. "We contain," Thorne said. His focus split between the sphere at our door and the Boone feed. "That's the protocol. Isolate the event. Minimize exposure. Document. Wait for it to pass." On the cabin feed, the front door opened. Boone stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held low but ready. He was squinting up at the focal point in the sky, his face a mask of defiance and terror. He couldn't see the smaller observers flitting in the shadows of his woodpile, but he could feel them. His body was rigid, braced against the psychic pressure we could only observe. The sphere in our corridor reacted. The geometric patterns on its surface flashed rapidly, mirroring the pulse of the larger light over Boone's cabin. A new sound pierced the air, a high, crystalline tone that seemed to exist both inside and outside my head. It was a sound of alignment, of two distant points locking into phase. "They're linked," Shaw whispered. "The primary here and the secondary at the cabin. They're acting in concert." "Concert for what?" I demanded. The answer came not from Thorne, but from the sphere itself. It moved, not toward the door, but upward. It floated to the center of the corridor, ceiling, and pressed against the concrete. Where it touched, the solid material didn't break, but it began to transmit. The sphere's light seeped into the concrete, turning a perfect circle of it translucent, then transparent. It was creating a window directly into our control room. Through this horrifying porthole, we could see the sphere's underside, and it could see us. The geometric patterns were gone. Its surface was now a perfect reflective mirror. It was reflecting us, but not as we were. The image in its surface was distorted, stretched. Thorne, Shaw, and I weren't separate figures in the reflection. We were smeared together into a single, blurry silhouette of human shape, surrounded by swirling, faint auras of color, emotion, intention, maybe thought itself, rendered visible. Behind this composite human image, the reflected control room was not a room of machines, but a nest of pulsing, interconnected light fibers, a schematic of energy flows and data streams. It wasn't showing us itself. It was showing us our reality, filtered through its perception. We weren't individuals to it. We were a localized cluster of conscious energy, operating a node of complex technology. The cabin feed, our consoles, the vibrating mountain. It was all part of the same interconnected system to this intelligence. The understanding hit me not as a thought, but as a visceral, nauseating insight. The dizziness from earlier surged back, amplified. The pressure behind my eyes became a pounding ache. I saw double. The physical control room and, overlaid upon it, the ghostly network of light it was showing us. The lines connected the humming servers to the mesa to the throbbing focal point outside, and that focal point in a brilliant, painful strand of light directly to the cabin on the screen. It seized the whole network. I mumbled, clutching the edge of a console to steady myself. The facility, the land, Boone, it's all one circuit to them. Thorne looked at me, his professional detachment finally cracking into something like shock. You're perceiving the field. On the cabin feed, Boone had raised his rifle. He wasn't aiming at the skylight. He was aiming at the dancing observers in his woodpile. His mouth was open in a scream we couldn't hear. As we watched, the rifle began to shake violently in his hands. Then it glowed, a sudden, fierce orange heat, and he dropped it with a cry. The metal steamed on the porch boards. Thermic induction, Shaw reported, her voice trembling. It's reacting to perceived threat. Non-lethal deterrence. But then, the large focal point above Boone's roof descended. It didn't jump. It flowed down like liquid light, forming a vertical column that touched the ground in the center of his yard. From this column, tendrils of light snaked out, not toward Boone, but toward as well his generator shed, the grounding rods of his cabin. It was probing the property's infrastructure, and one tendril found the main power line running from a pole to his cabin. The feed exploded in a shower of digital snow, then went black. No, I shouted. It's not attacking him, Thorne said, his voice hollow with a terrible realization. It's studying the node. It's analyzing the human habitat, and it's trying to communicate with the primary consciousness it detects there. Boone's alone in the dark with that thing. I said, the horror crystallizing. The sphere at our ceiling window reacted to the blackout. Its mirrored surface shimmered and changed again, the reflected image of us as an energy cluster dissolved. New forms took shape. I saw, or my brain, under the increasing resonance, interpreted flashes. A silhouette of man Boone, alone in a dark box, his cabin. Lines of stress fracturing out from the box, fear, isolation. Then, an image of the same box connected by glowing lines, other, distant boxes, community, communication. It was showing a problem and a solution. Boone's isolation was a broken state. Connection was a desired norm. The message was clear. It was agonizingly altruistic and utterly catastrophic. It was trying to fix his loneliness by linking him to the network. Its network to crystalline tone reached a crescendo. Inside the control room, every monitor, every LED, every piece of metal that wasn't part of the dampening composite began to vibrate. My fillings sang in my teeth. The ghostly network overlay in my vision became blindingly bright. I could feel the tendril of light reaching from the mesa to the cabin as a physical tension in the air, a taut wire of conscious energy. Then, from the blacked-out cabin on the ridge camera, a single, piercing scream ripped through the audio feed. It was Boone, a sound of such profound, existential terror that it transcended fear. It was a sound of a mind touching the infinite and fracturing on its shore. The sphere at our ceiling withdrew. Its light retracted from the concrete, which solidified back into opaque gunmetal gray. It floated back down to the corridor floor. The geometric patterns returned to its surface, now slow, subdued, like a language spoken in a whisper. The humming in the mountain began to fade. The throbbing waveform on Shaw's secondary screen started its steep decline. On the ridge camera, the luminous pillar in Boone's yard dissolved. The ring of observers winked out, one by one. Within 60 seconds, the mesa top was dark and still under moon. The event was over. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. It was a silence of aftermath. Thorne slumped into his chair. Shaw put her head in her hands, breathing ragged. My own mind felt scraped raw. The ghostly overlay was gone, but the memory of it was seared into my perception. I could still feel the echo of that taut wire of light, and the final, silent snap when Boone screamed. The vault door's magnetic lock disengaged with a dull clunk. Thorne looked up at me. His face aged a decade in an hour. "It's done. For now." He gestured to the door. "You should go to him. He'll need familiar faces. Before we send ours." The hours hung in the air. The cleanup crew, the men in unmarked SUVs who would debrief, medicate, in silence. I didn't say another word. I walked out of the control room, down the sterile corridor, up the metal stairs. I pushed open the hatch into the cold, normal desert night. The air smelled of pine, not ozone. Stars, not spheres, dotted the sky. I ran to my cruiser. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I sped down the broken road, one sentence of Thorne's echoed in the vault of my skull. The true mission of Sector Tango now laid bare. We don't monitor the phenomenon, deputy. We monitor the damage. The drive to Boone's cabin was a blur of adrenaline crash and dawning horror. The rational part of my mind, the deputy trained to assess scenes, was already compartmentalizing possible home invasion, assault, electrical fire, victim in shock. But the part of me that stood in that underground room, that had seen reality reinterpreted, knew those categories were useless. What box do you check for an encounter with the sublime? His cabin was a dark silhouette against a gradually graying pre-dawn sky. No friendly glow from the windows, no generator hum. The only light came from my cruiser's headlights, painting the scene in stark, moving shadows. The porch came into view. His rifle lay where he dropped it, the barrel warped and discolored as if subjected to a blowtorch. The front door stood wide open to the cold night. I killed the engine and drew my flashlight. "Walter? It's Eli Vance." Silence. I approached, the beam of my light cutting across the porch floorboards, over the distorted rifle, and into the cabin's dark maw. The smell hit me first, not smoke, but ozone, the sharp, clean scent of a lightning strike, mixed with a coppery tang of blood. "Walter," a groan from inside. "Low," pained. I stepped through the doorway. The interior was a chaos of mundane disaster. Every light bulb had exploded, leaving jagged glass and fixtures. The digital clock on the microwave was a dark void. My light caught the gleam of shattered picture glass on the floor. But there were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture. It was as if a silent pressure wave had moved through the space, breaking only the fragile, modern things that I found him in his small living room, slumped in his worn armchair. He was staring straight ahead, unblinking, his face pale and slick with sweat. A thin trickle of blood ran from his left ear down his neck. On the table beside him, a half-drunk glass of water had vibrated into a perfect, frozen spiral of ice. "Walt, look at me." I knelt in front of him, clicking off my bright light. His pupils were massively dilated, black pools swallowing the blue of his irises. He was breathing, but it was shallow, automatic. His eyes shifted slowly, mechanically, to meet mine. There was no recognition. Not of me, not of the room, not of himself. His gaze held a terrifying, hollow vacancy. It was a look of someone who had seen the engine of creation and had their memories of it forcibly erased, leaving only the scar of the experience. They were in the angles, he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. In the spaces between the light and the dark. They showed me the connections, the wires. We're all alone in our boxes, Eli. But the wires, they're there. We just can't see them. A tear cut through the sweat on his cheek. They tried to plug me in. To the chorus. It was so loud. He began to shake. A fine, full-body tremor. He hugged himself, rocking slightly. "Make it quiet. Please. Make the humming stop." There was no hum. The event was over. The hum was inside him now, a permanent resonance in the ruins of his neural pathways. Thorne's words echoed, broken minds and buried reports. The distant rumble of powerful engines broke the stillness. Headlights swept through the trees, two large black SUVs with tinted windows, moving with purposeful speed up Boone's dirt driveway. The cleanup crew. Thorne had called them faster than I had driven, that I met them on the porch. Two men and a woman emerged, all in dark, casual tactical gear, no insignia. They move with a quiet, efficient confidence that bypassed authority and went straight to sovereignty. The lead man said, a square-jawed individual with a voice that held no room for question. We'll take it from here. Dr. Thorne briefed us. Mr. Boone will be receiving the specialized care he requires. He needs a hospital, I said, blocking the doorway, my own authority feeling laughably small. He needs our medical team. The man replied evenly. They are en route to a dedicated facility. What he experienced is a unique neurological trauma. Standard hospitals would misdiagnose, mistreat, and cause further harm. He took a step closer, his voice dropping. You were in the containment zone, deputy. You're experiencing secondary exposure effects. The dizziness, the heightened sensory perception, the fragmented thoughts. It will pass in a few days as your brain filters out the residual resonance. But if you want to keep your badge, your sanity, and protect Mr. Boone from becoming a lab rat in the public system, you will step aside. It was a velvet glove over the iron fist, a promise of care wrapped in a threat. I looked past him into the cabin, at my friend rocking in his chair, muttering about wires and choruses. The public system would fail him. They'd label him psychotic, drug him into a stupor, and leave him in a Medicaid bed. These people, for all their chilling efficiency, at least understood what he was. I stepped aside. Their team moved in with gentle, practiced precision. They didn't handcuff or restrain Boone. One spoke to him in soft, calming tones about getting some rest. They helped him to his feet, draped a blanket over his shoulders, and guided him out to a waiting SUV. He went without resistance, a sleepwalker. He didn't look back. The woman stayed behind with me. She handed me a tablet. Standard NDAs and consultancy agreements. The consultancy is pro forma, a cover, a paycheck, and a way for us to legally mandate your periodic mental health check-ins with our specialists. Sign, and you walk away with your life mostly intact. Refuse, and you'll be detained for observation as a potential risk to yourself and others due to acute paranoid delusion. She said like she was reading a weather report. The choice is binary, deputy. I scrolled through the legalese. Pages of it. The gist was simple. I saw nothing. I say nothing. I work for them in name only, and I submit to their psychological oversight. In return, Walter Boone gets care, and I don't get destroyed. I signed on the dotted line with a numb finger. 3 days later, the dizziness and the double vision faded, as promised. The memory did not. I returned to duty. I filed a vague report about Boone being relocated for urgent, private medical treatment after a domestic accident involving a faulty generator. The sheriff glanced at it, asked no questions, and filed it away. The world moved on about a month after that. A plain envelope appeared in my department mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a clinical and signed progress report. It stated that Walter Boone was responding well to targeted neuroregressive therapy in a secure, restful environment. It noted his episodes of perceptual disorientation were decreasing in frequency. The final line read, patient shows no significant long-term memory retention of the inciting event. Prognosis for managed stability. Fair. They hadn't cured him. They'd edited him. They'd scoured the terrifying wonder from his mind and left him stable, hollow, and safe. I started my consultancy. It consisted of a monthly video call with a polite, nameless psychologist who asked scripted questions about my sleep, mood, and whether I experienced any unusual sensory phenomena. I always answered no, but sometimes on the night shift, parked on a remote overlook, I'd look up at the stars and not see points of light. I'd see nodes. I'd look at the distant, twinkling lights of a ranch house and not see a home, but an isolated box. The feeling of interconnectedness, the ghost of the network I perceived, would whisper at the edge of my consciousness. I had refused the plug, but the shape of the socket was burned into my perception. I drove past the turnoff to Sector Tango often. The gate was now repaired, secure with a heavy new chain and a bright, official, "No trespassing" federal property sign. The Mesa slept, or pretended to. I had chosen a prison of my own, singular mind over the terrifying freedom of the chorus. I had traded truth for stability. And as I drive my lonely patrols under the silent, watchful sky, a single, unanswerable question haunts me. Did I save myself, or did I condemn myself to the quietest form of solitary confinement? The wire is there. I know it is. And some nights, the silence is so deep, I can almost hear the hum on the other end. This story doesn't end with a neat conclusion or a government confession. It ends with a choice, one I live with every single day. The choice between the peace of ignorance and the burden of a truth that cannot be shared. That's what this channel, Winds of Thought, is about. We navigate those silent spaces between what we're told and what we suspect, between the official record and the whispered testimony. We explore the stories that live in the shadows of consensus reality. Not to sell you on conspiracy, but to acknowledge the mystery that still exists at the edges of our understanding. The incident at Sector Tango is not unique. It is a pattern, repeated in remote locations across the globe, documented in fragmented reports, and buried in the classified archives of a dozen nations. The phenomena have many names. UAP, non-human intelligence, ultraterrestrials, the others. But the core experience is terrifyingly consistent, an encounter with a consciousness that is fundamentally alien not in origin, but in nature. A consciousness that perceives reality as an interconnected whole and seeks to communicate that overwhelming truth with catastrophic consequences for the human mind, which is built for separation in story. Why am I telling you this now? Because the silence is breaking. Official channels are begrudgingly admitting there are things in our skies they cannot identify or explain. Pilots, military personnel, and yes, even law enforcement officers like myself are coming forward. The dam of denial is cracking. But the real story isn't in the slow drip of government disclosure. The real story is in the human cost. It's in the Walter Boons of the world, whose lives are forever altered by a brush with the impossible. It's in the psychological toll of carrying a secret that reshapes your entire perception of existence. I am not an activist. I am a witness. My goal is not to convince you, but to document, to add one more first-hand account to record, so that when the full history of this long, strange contact is finally written, the human perspective, the confusion, the fear, the tragic cost, is not lost in the dry. Technical analysis of signatures and radar returns. If this narrative resonates with you, if you feel that tug of curiosity about what lies beyond the official story, then you're already part of this conversation. Your attention is the currency of truth in an age of noise. So, do me a favor. If you want to support this kind of independent, first-hand testimony, give this video a like. That simple act tells the algorithm that there's an audience for stories that dare to look into the dark. And if you want to ensure you don't miss the next account from the edge, subscribe to Winds of Thought. We are all, in our own way, patrolling the borderlands of the known. Sometimes, the most important thing we can do is to have the courage to listen to the whispers on the wind, and the greater courage to share what we hear, even when our voice shakes. The search for understanding is a lonely road, but we don't have to walk it alone. Subscribe, and let's continue the search together.